There we go. So I think you'll have to make up for it at home with some apple turnovers and popcorn while you enjoy a really interesting discussion on a topic that I'm sure many of you were looking forward to learn more about, what Judaism has to say on the topic of heaven and hell. Okay? Really, this lesson, if you look at the student books, is supposed to include reincarnation, but heaven and hell is enough of a topic that I think we're going to focus on that itself today. And we are going to try our best to cover it in full and to at least get somewhat in depth about heaven and hell. So question number one that we're going to cover today is what is the Jewish view on heaven and hell? What happens, what transpires in the heaven and hell version of Judaism? Very important question. And finally, we're going to discuss the stages of heaven and hell and what we can do to benefit those who are deceased. So if we can open our books to page 124, or before and while you're doing that, I'm going to share a video on my screen. This is a really interesting parable analogy.
Oh.
Come again? Someone had a question? No, I think that was it. Okay.
TorahCafe.com.
Birth and death are as contradictory as night and light. But they are strangely associated with an identical Hebrew word, kever. Kever means a tomb where a body is buried. But kever also means a womb where life is formed. A womb is a gateway to life, while a tomb is a gateway to afterlife. But is there an afterlife? Or does laying a body to rest in a grave mark the absolute end? If it were within our power to interview a soul, we would undoubtedly glean insight into afterlife. Instead, we have chosen to eavesdrop on a set of twins in their mother's womb to shed some light on the before life.
Hey, twin, I'm scared of birth.
Why?
It's the end of existence. We get ejected. We're finished.
I'm also anxious, twin, but I'm not scared. Birth is supposed to be a transition to the real life.
Huh. Don't give me the hiccups with your after-birth, real-life fantasies. How can life be supported without an umbilical cord and amniotic fluid?
Well, maybe it's a radically different form of life. Maybe we won't need the cord.
I wish you were right. I keep kicking that thing away from my neck.
Stop spinning for a minute and imagine, twin. After birth, we will enter a ginormous universe filled with light and with air that we will breathe through our mouths.
Come on, grow some brain cells, will you? Mouths are not for breathing. Besides, if your postnatal paradise existed, why has no one ever returned from that realm? Forget it. Once we leave here, we collapse into cold, dry nothingness and wither into eternal gloom.
I don't think Mother would allow that to happen. She nurtures us in this cozy womb. She sends us nutrients for months on end. For what purpose? Just to end it all with birth? No. Mother has greater plans for us than that.
Now you're beginning to sound infantile. Do you see a mother lurking in some corner of the womb? Not a trace. Show me a mother. And as for your nutrients, can't you feel that annoying cord? Don't exchange empirical for fantastical.
Thankfully, these two delightful infants made it safely to the other side. They grew up in the universe that one had described and the other had denied. And until today, they continue their clamorous debate. It is only that the topic of contention has slightly shifted from, is there life after the womb, to, is there life after the tomb?
So the point of this analogy is to show that there is something beyond this world, beyond the present state of existence, beyond the earthly life in this world. Now, I think that, as we see in the analogy, because we're so entrenched in our day-to-day life in this physical world, we can't even imagine life outside of this world. It makes no sense. This world is life. Outside of this world is not life. Call it afterlife, call whatever you want. We don't understand that there's something beyond the present state of existence, which is a very, very important part. Hey, Mark. A very important point to understand before we get into the discussion of heaven, hell, and the details of afterlife. Essentially, we don't die. We're born twice. Once from the womb and once from the tomb. It's not that there is something that we are just imagining. There's another state of existence. And it's just too foreign for us to really understand what it means. Just like one of the twins in the womb cannot even begin to fathom that there's a life outside of that. We cannot begin to fathom there's life outside of it. So before we begin, I think it's important that we look at our learning exercise. And those of you who are on Zoom, I apologize that I was not able to get a good scan. They came out very, very blurry and black and white, black, like streaks of black all over the page. So it was not really legible. So we're going to ask those of you who are sitting here and helping us read to open to page 124. There's a learning exercise here. It's not just a text, a learning exercise where I want you guys to think what you think you know about the Jewish view on afterlife and reincarnation. Okay. And on the other side, we see what I would like to know about the Jewish view on afterlife and reincarnation. And again, you're welcome to share what you're thinking. Again, if you're on Zoom, feel free to unmute yourself at any point. And if you are here with us, if there's anything you would like to know before we begin the class, so you can see if we can try to cover those topics. And maybe you can try to share what you think you know about afterlife.
A whole lot. Yeah.
Did I just stump
That's why
everyone? Anyone here virtually think that they know anything about afterlife in Judaism? Eric, I have a feeling you have what to say.
Well, actually, Monica came up with something. She's more of a question.
Go for it.
I guess I was just wondering, do we ever get a glimpse of any other lives? Or is it something that we will never know? Like when people say, oh, I was this in my past life, like, is that complete malarkey, or is there ever a clue to that? Like considering, dreams, like things we dream about,
Right.
Are we ever dreaming about another life, or do we ever know that we meet somebody from another life? Is there any clue into that?
So I'm not sure if it's a two-part question or a one-part question, but you seem to be touching mostly on the topic that I think most here are the most intrigued by, which is reincarnation. That we're a reincarnation of a previous soul, or what we're going to be in future lives, etc. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, that's
Okay.
that's correct.
So that's going to be next week's lesson. I'm sorry to keep you in suspense, but that's going to be lesson 4. We're at lesson 3. Lesson 4 is all about reincarnation, and it is a fascinating topic. We're going to talk about that at length, so much so that officially it's supposed to be part of this lesson, but I think it's such an important one that I made it its own lesson. So we're going to do that next week. And we're going to talk about whether you get a glimpse and in what type of format.
So I don't know if there's anybody else that wants to speak, but I would say quickly that afterlife is probably more of a feeling. That the best way that I could, I mean, I don't know, but what I read or what I understand is that it's it could be like a painful feeling, or if you're going through some kind of purification or something like that, if you need some cleansing or whatever afterwards. I guess there's some pain there. Like, it's more of a feeling. That's the way I've read it to be described.
So that's very, very important, and you're definitely touching upon the right words, and we're going to get there. So thank you. Go for it.
Big questions. One is like, do our souls get to have some kind of direct experience of God at that point? Are we like interacting more directly with
Great
God?
question. We're going to find that out today.
What do we get to see what's happening on Earth, see our families, and like when I tell my son I will love him forever, and I live forever, and I be truthful.
Right. Okay. Also a very good question. So that it's going to be part of that same question. 1 and 2 will be answered kind of together. What is the experience in the world to come? Basically, that's the core of the question. Okay. Anyone else?
Start talking.
Start talking, or I'm going to get up and leave. So I think some of you are really asking this question in your heads, but you're probably too afraid to ask, or maybe too afraid to ask. But I assume a lot of you are thinking, if there is a hell, am I going there? Am I heading to hell? Right? Okay. Oh, you came to the right class, friend. Okay. So you're about to find out a radical view of hell and heaven that no other religions subscribe to this type of heaven and hell. No, Torah, straight up. This is not it's not even and by the way, you should just know that, because you mentioned that, there's one of the videos that I'll actually maybe post a link soon on the chat, where Rabbi Jonathan Sachs speaks about how amazing it is. How you look in the entire Torah, there's very little reference to the afterlife. You have to like look for it. It's not so simple. And yet the references point to something really, really deep that we're going to talk about today. Go ahead.
What about reincarnation? Is it anything like?
Sorry for cutting you off. I don't want to get too sidetracked with reincarnation, because that's going to be next week's lesson.
Oh,
so feel free to ask away. But if it's about reincarnation specifically, so I'm not even going to answer the question today, because I know already we're getting to it next week. Go for it, Bill.
Is our belief or understanding afterlife have an influence about what we do this life, or should it?
$1 million question. Should our belief in afterlife affect the way we live our lives here? That is a very important question. So important that that's going to actually wrap up the lesson today. Okay, it's a very good one. Another quick intro before we start our discussion is we're going to ask a question. Look at 125. Another learning exercise, not a text. So I'm going to give a few scenarios. So even if you're not with a student book, like those of you on Zoom, I'm going to give you a quick questionnaire about life here on this world, and you're going to rate it in your head. Don't even tell me what you rate it. In your head from 1 to 10. Okay? Rate the following entities in terms of how much pleasure you would receive from them. 1, most pleasurable. 10, the least pleasurable. Number 1 is a Hawaiian cruise. A lifetime membership to an exclusive country club. A lifetime of meaning, love, social status, true joy, wealth, wisdom. All of these topics, think in your head how you would rate them from 1 to 10. Okay? And before you even answer what you answered, we're going to get to the results in just a minute. I know that that Amy is very antsy, so I really have to go, really fast with this discussion. Shvilkas, exactly, Shvilkas. Now, sorry, Amy, one more disappointment is that before we begin to understand if there's heaven and what is hell, if there is hell, we have to understand the concept of reward and punishment in the Torah. This is a crucial and fundamental principle in Torah. And not just that, but this will help us understand if hell exists, is it a punishment? Is it something a reward, etc. So let's read text 1a, which is on page 126. We know that the world, especially in Torah and Judaism, we have the concept of reward and punishment. Now, the fact that God has an active interest in man's actions and creates rewards and punishments for those actions in this world is not just a thing you'll find in the Torah. It's one of the 13 principles of faith that Maimonides outlines are the fundamentals of belief in Judaism. That goes along with belief in God, with the coming of Mashiach, with many different things. One of them is the concept of reward and punishment. So we're going to talk about that. So text 1a, Amy, because you're in Shmulkas, I'll hand that over to you. Go for it.
The 11th principle.
Just as loud as possible so they can hear him.
The 11th principle, that God, blessed be He, gives reward to those who observe the commandments of the Torah and punishes those who transgress its prohibitions.
So we see clearly that there's a principle of faith. One of the 13 principles is that there is reward and punishment. Now, when do these punishments happen? Good question. Maimonides doesn't leave us hanging. He explains in text 1b. Bill, you want to read out loud, page 126?
Greatest reward, carries the pleasure of the world to come. Greatest punishment cut off in the world to come.
So Maimonides says that even though reward and punishment happen in the physical world as well as in the spiritual world, the strongest rewards and punishments happen in the world to come. Why is that? Why is the ultimate reward and ultimate punishment in the world to come and not in this physical world? I'll tell you why. Because the ultimate reward you can give someone is spiritual rewards. I'm sure you're thinking, come on, Rabbi. I know you can enjoy a good, nice cruise, a nice physical vacation. I'm sure you can enjoy a good piece of meat. I'm sure you can enjoy life. Don't tell me spiritual reward is the most intense and most pleasurable experience. But to be honest, if you look at the results of what you yourselves answered just before, you'll notice, and I assume I'm pretty confident that I'm right about this, that with all those options about the Hawaiian cruise and the country club membership and the social status and the wealth, they ranked a lot lower than love, joy, wisdom, which are spiritual rewards. By the spiritual doesn't mean godly. It means spiritual. Go for it. How do we know what? I'll ask you. We're no. I'm saying back up. Where would you, friend? What do you find more pleasurable? Imagine you're able to get one of these: true joy in life, or a country club membership that you've always wished for. Right, I'm saying obviously hypothetical. I'm not saying you do, but imagine there was one, right? What would you choose? I assume joy. Right? What does that mean? That what you find more pleasurable than a physical reward is a spiritual reward.
Okay.
So you find, all of us, actually, I'm pretty sure nearly every single human finds spiritual rewards more pleasurable, infinitely more pleasurable.
We need to necessarily be motivated by a reward.
Oh,
Basically, the right thing to do with the moral infrastructure that you have, as opposed to, well, if I do this, I'm going to get a reward.
so Bill has my favorite questions. You know why? My favorite questions are always the questions that lead me to the following discussion. Right? So it's perfect. Thank you for segueing into the next part of the discussion. Mark, just give me 1 second. Let me just tell you what I was referring to. And for those of you who didn't hear Bill's question clearly, is Is reward and punishment really that important? Come on, especially forget about humans. God, you really think he cares about every lowly act we do, that we should get punished for every lowly transgression we do? Come on.
Well, that's the other different. Should the anticipation of a reward be the motivating factor?
Correct. And part two is exactly what you just said. Isn't that a pretty low standard to have, that what is your entire life based off of? Rewards and punishments, right? It's a little bit funny that our life kind of revolves around something that seemingly on the surface level for sure is not very deep. It's not a very deep thing to live life based on an incentive system. You do that maybe with children in a camp, in a school, you give them raffle tickets, but come on, we're adults here. We don't live life like that. So it's a very, very important conversation, but just quickly, Mark, what was your question?
So this is kind of a two-part question. One is, number one, joy is not necessarily spiritual. So there could be selfish joy as well.
That's not true joy, though.
Pardon?
True joy is not selfish joy. True love is not selfish love. So spiritually, these are the true concepts of love, joy, and wisdom.
And the other question was, when we're talking about these things, are we talking about the way we live our life? Are we talking about what the Torah says, 12 commandments?
What specifically are you referring to? Sorry. What specifically are you referring to when you ask that question?
As far as whether you
Find those things more pleasurable?
whether you become nothing or experience an afterlife, a good afterlife.
I don't fully understand what you're saying.
Afterlife or a good afterlife, which means that afterlife, I assume, is nothingness.
Okay, so you're touching upon something that we really have to get to the bottom of. What is hell? What is heaven? We don't understand those things. And first, you have to obviously have to understand what reward and punishment is in Torah. But once we understand what heaven and hell is, I'm pretty sure that's going to answer your question. I may be wrong, but I think so. So I hope.
Not exactly.
No?
That's what determines it.
Oh, okay. So what we're over here, we're discussing what is the Jewish view, the Torah view on these things. Specifically. Correct.
Not specifically. Is it specifically Jewish law or not?
Specifically.
So does that include kosher?
Well, yes, and that's going to be part of the discussion. Okay. Now, not just, and just to add one more question to what you said, Bill, is not just isn't it funny that we have a reward system, is that it's so important, not just that it's an important thing, it's a fundamental belief. It's one of the 13 principles of faith. A reward system and a punishment system doesn't sound like that's so important to me. Right?
Is it my point is that a motivational factor?
Okay.
Is certainly what we do rather than.
So thanks for segueing into the next part again. So the truth is that some would say that reward and punishment is an incentive for us lowly creatures. What I mean by that is, even though we would love to be altruistic humans, we're not. We're not. We all know, we may not say it, we may not admit it, but having rewards and punishment in our lives are motivators for how we live our lives. And from a certain degree, from a certain perspective, we have to contend with reality. And reward and punishment, like it or not, is what drives many people to do what they do. Right? A lot of what we do or don't do, think about it, is driven by what we get for it and what we get punished for it, or by not doing it. A lot of what we do, what we eat, when we wake up in the morning, there are a lot of consequences and punishments to what we do. And there are rewards for doing certain things. So even though it would be nice to live a very altruistic life, which 100% it would be, we're humans and we're not like that. But that's a very, very basic answer to that question. But I want to get to a much deeper answer. But
Would this involve?
sorry, one second. And if you're on Zoom, feel free to unmute yourself just like anyone here. So just make yourself at home and part of the class. So feel free to unmute at any point.
Does this also have a lot to do with our own conscience? In other words, for instance, I knew all my life that I was Jewish, but at some point I wasn't able to continue. And at another point, I was becoming more and more curious about it.
Right.
So I may not know as much about, well, I do not know as much about Torah as many people. Yet I think I've been, in most cases, guided by my conscience.
Right. So the answer is yes, 100%. It definitely does play a big role, big role. And we're going to touch upon it a little bit, but not by much. But the answer is yes. So what's a deeper understanding of reward and punishment? I know I'm dragging this out, but I'm not. Because if you don't understand this, you won't understand what hell is and what heaven is. That's the honest truth. So I know I see some of you are jumping in your seats, whether virtually or in person, but we're getting there. We're getting there. So there's a deeper understanding of the dynamics of reward and punishment. That's text 2. Rebecca, you mind reading? This is a quote from the Recanati. The Recanati was a very famous Kabbalist from Italy. Lived quite a few hundred years ago, nearly 1,000 years ago, 800 years ago. 1250 to 1310. Yep. So if you can read text 2 out loud, Rebecca.
The punishments described in the Torah are not similar to the punishments needed for transgressing the decree of an earthly king. Rather, the Torah's punishments are natural consequences. One who fails to observe a Torah commandment is denied the good that naturally results from its observance. This is similar to one who doesn't sow, who then obviously cannot reap, or one who doesn't wear clothing, who becomes cold. But the nature of fire is to cause heat. The nature of water is to make wet. The nature of bread to satiate. Similarly, it is the nature of each mitzvah to elicit the positive consequences that are consequences for this.
So let's analyze 2 scenarios of actions and their consequences. Right? We all need food to survive. How do we get food? Right? One option is to come to our class. No, I'm kidding. Instacart, exactly. So there's 2 possible scenarios to get food. Let's look at figure 4.1 on 128. One option is you have a business person. It could be any field in the world. You could be a business person in finance. You could be a janitor. You could be a tailor that works for a living. And exchange for the work that you do, you get money. And for that money, you purchase food. That's how most of the people in this world receive food. That's option 1. Scenario 2 is where a farmer sows his field with seeds, and then he reaps the produce. Now, what's the difference between the 2 scenarios? A very, very deep understanding here. In the first understanding, in the first scenario, where a business person works, they make money, and then they buy food with them. There's no intrinsic relationship between your work and the food. Your work that gets you money is very arbitrary, by the way, that relationship. Some people work, don't get money. Some people take, many stay-at-home moms, they work, they don't get money, right? Or you have people who get different amounts of money for the same work, right? It's just what society decided that for this work, this is where you're going to get paid. And then you, by choice, buy with that money some food. But there's no real relationship between what you do and what the end result is. If you work on Wall Street, that doesn't equal food. The natural reaction of that is not food. You get paid because that's the job, and the job decided to pay you X amount of money, and for that money, you decided to buy food. In scenario 2, when you are sowing seeds in a field, the natural, I wouldn't call it a consequence, but the natural reaction of that is that there's food. Your work equals food. Why is that so important? Why is it so important? Because the way Recanati understands it, this is a very, very famous way that Judaism looks at reward and punishment is that there's not a reward and punishment for what you do. Judaism looks at that what you do creates something after that. So if you do something, there's a natural consequence for what you do. It's not that what you do now God is upset at you and therefore he's going to punish you. What you do creates a ripple effect. As we see in text 3, not just the material rewards are like this, but even spiritually. In text 3, Mark, you want to read out loud? Mark Moskowitz, text 3 and 128. Now, on a simple level, that means that when someone does a mitzvah, God rewards him or her with another mitzvah opportunity. But on a much deeper level, is that the reward of, and this is a quote from Ethics of Our Fathers, is that the reward for the mitzvah itself is the relationship or the action that you cause through this mitzvah. I'll give you an example. A robber, a thief, who goes and robs a bank. What's the punishment? Now, I know that he may be punished for his crime by going to jail. That's possible. What's the real punishment, though? No, what's the real punishment that happens to him? What's the punishment, though? What's the again, now that we understand what punishment means, the punishment really is the consequence that he robbed himself of his own dignity, that he went to rob a bank. When a spouse is disrespectful to the other, yes, you want to call the punishment that now they're arguing with each other, and now the spouse may get angry and respond to that. Yes, that can technically be the punishment, but that's not what we're referring to here. What we are referring to here is that when a spouse is disrespectful to their spouse, what happens is you create a toxic and unsafe relationship. That is the punishment. The action itself creates the punishment, creates the consequence. Correct. So very good question, because we see that, and just to expound on what Rebecca said, we see that in certain parts of the Torah, not just the Shema, but many parts, where there's a reward, a physical reward for what you do, that doesn't seem related to what the action is. The answer is that the way Torah views it is that what you do is it causes those things to happen. Straight up. It's a consequence of your relationship with Hashem. Hashem as a reciprocation to their relationship. Think of it yourself in your own relationship. When you do something for your spouse, when they reciprocate to you, is it directly connected to what you did? No, not necessarily. But it's deepening your relationship. You deepen their relationship with them. They want to do something back for you. Not just, tit for tat. They really want to. Hashem is telling you, if you do this, it's going to evoke within me a reason to reciprocate to you in a physical sense. Spiritually, we just saw as well.
So it's still being described as a
natural consequence. Correct. Correct. And by the way, this truth, and this leads us into heaven and hell, the afterlife, really also applies to rewards and punishments in the afterlife.
In your example.
Sorry, just 1 second. Let me just finish my train of thought. Because our afterlife is not another world that exists already. It's a natural consequence of our actions in this world. When a person passes, they get a full unobstructed view of their entire lifetime of actions. We're going to expound on that. They're going to get a full unobstructed view, perspective, and experience, actually, more than just perspective, an experience of your actions in this world. Go ahead, Mark.
The question I had was, In your example, for instance, some couple is arguing,
Mhm.
and some people think that it takes two to argue.
Right.
That's not necessarily true.
Right.
So if there's an argument that happens and it's mainly one person that's doing the arguing without a valid reason,
Right.
that also makes that relationship toxic for the person who possibly has done no bad.
Correct. That's exactly the point. That when someone is disrespectful to their spouse, the punishment is not that your spouse may get back at you. That may happen, by the way. So get ready for that. But beyond that, the real deeper punishment that you're creating for yourself is the consequence. That you just created a divide in your relationship, a toxic relationship. That is the real problem.
But it also causes damage to us and this person.
Right. But again, it all boils down to what did you do? You created a problem between you and your spouse. Not you, God forbid.
Sounds like
One.
an action.
Correct. It's an action with the natural consequence to it.
Can we go back to the robber, the thief?
Yeah, go ahead.
That commits the crime, okay? And let's assume he doesn't have much of a conscience. That's the way he is. He robs, okay? So where is the punishment? The action of the robbery itself should create the punishment, but he doesn't feel punished because he has no guilt. So what is his punishment? If he doesn't go to jail, let's assume he gets away with it, in other words.
Now, okay, good question. But you can also argue the same thing with a spouse. What's if a spouse really doesn't like their spouse? Right? He doesn't care to make it a toxic relationship. He'll divorce his wife. Let's just say. Meaning the consequence doesn't necessarily mean that you're bothered by it today. That's not the consequence is the facts. The fact is the thief now robbed himself of his own dignity. That's the fact. Whether he's aware of that or not, we don't know. And he may only suffer from that once he truly sees his life as a soul and he sees only truth and good. He'll see how egotistical he was, how neurotic he may have been, and how low he was, that he'll actually, oh, by the way, I have to give you credit. That also leads me to the next point. Okay, thank you. So now we finally got an understanding of what reward and punishment is. Reward and punishment is not just, all right, God says, this is what you do, okay, now I give you a prize. You do this, now I'm upset, and therefore I'll punish you. These are natural consequences of our relationship that we're creating, or that we're causing issues to with God. So now it's time to turn our attention to the topic of the day, of heaven and hell. What is the first word or idea that enters your mind when you hear the word hell? Fire, okay. Devil. What?
Evil.
Christian, okay.
Fire.
Fire, okay.
Evil.
Evil, okay.
Darkness.
Darkness. Isolation, okay.
Eternal punishment.
What is it? Eternal what?
Eternal punishment.
Eternal punishment, okay.
Right?
Okay. So I think all of you are more or less on the same page as to what hell means in your heads before today. And I'm hoping that over the next 15 minutes, you'll understand the Jewish view, which is radically different. Okay, so let's start with hell. Before we get to heaven, let's start with hell. Judaism does believe in a form of hell. Let that sink in. Judaism does believe in a form of hell, but not the hell you're referring to or that you're thinking of. It is radically different from the perception you have, no question about it. So that's why I think a better version of the word hell in Hebrew is Gehinom, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But usually, hell, and I know one of you mentioned Christian, some other religions, or many actually other religions, believe that hell is a punishment for your bad behavior in this world. Right? Every religion will have different, different parameters as to what is considered bad behavior, etc. Now, it's a pretty disturbing idea if that's what it is. At least I am disturbed because even though punishment for what we do seems to be a normal thing, but when it comes to God, like, really, you have to punish us for not doing this or for doing this? It seems very weird that God feels a need to punish us for something we did in this world. Judaism does not take that view at all. At all. It is not a punishment. Period. End of story. So if it's not a punishment, then what is it? Okay? Amy, I know. I'll give it actually a better word, and this may help us understand a little bit more what it is. A better terminology for hell in Judaism is soul rehab. Okay? Soul rehab. Soul cleansing. I know, Eric, you mentioned this initially. Soul cleansing, soul rehab. Now, what is going on? My soul needs rehab. My soul, I thought my soul is fine. It left my body. It's fine, not trapped in. What kind of rehab does it need? So we all know that, I'll give an example of charity, right? When we give $10 to someone homeless sitting on the street, what did we accomplish? Right? Right, but I'm saying, what was accomplished there? That the recipient got $10 and now he can go buy himself a sandwich, right? Or figure out. Right, meaning, right.
And that's reward of just, you did, the fact is you did something correct, fact to fact, whether you get a reward or a punishment.
So is it about the person you give it to or about you?
Oh.
Yeah.
Judaism has a very, very important viewpoint that it's not just about the recipient. In a way, it's actually more in a way about you.
Yeah.
But what charity does to you as the giver. When you give charity, especially when you give it often, what it does to you is something that you can't even imagine. And everyone who does this knows this, because you become a giving, a kind person. It really does something special to you. And as we mentioned before, when you do something bad, we also know that it doesn't just harm the person that you're intending to harm, it also affects you very, very much. So Joe, like what you said before, the thief may not even care, but what it does to you is very, very, very deep. It causes real damage.
And that person, wanted to say, might be such a stuff, for lack of a better term, that they might never feel bad about that.
Right.
That's not the point. The point is that they are a moment.
Correct.
That they did something terrible.
Right.
You know?
Even though thieves won't admit it, I'm using thieves as a typical
Right,
criminal,
right.
but it really drags them
Your
down.
soul.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Even, by the way, emotionally, it drags them down. However much that they suppress their emotions, it
Yeah.
drags them down. That's a matter of fact. Not just our emotions, but our soul is affected by what we do in this world. Whatever we do in this world, it takes a toll. A good thing, a bad thing, it takes a toll. It affects the soul. Now, obviously, most of us aren't perfect. We make a lot of mistakes, or at least I can talk for myself. I make a lot of mistakes. I'm human. And some of the actions that we do in this world create a distance between a human and God. That's a matter of fact. Again, I'm talking for myself, so I hope I'm not projecting my sins upon anyone. But when we distance ourselves from God, in essence, what we're doing is that you cannot enter heaven in such a way because your relationship is not very, very good. Your soul's relationship, yes, true. Your soul totally left the body. It's free to do what it always wanted to do, right? It never wanted to go into the body. Now it's free to go back. And yet, the soul needs a lot of rehab. It needs a cleansing because of what we did in this world. It needs rehabilitation. This intermediate stage is called Gehinnom, hell. Why is it hell? Because it's painful. Rehab is painful. Cleansing of a soul is painful. The soul is learning how to be a soul again. The more course of a life we live, the more actions that we've done in this world that distance a soul from spirituality, the longer the rehab. The more rehab it needs. A soul is damaged. At least my soul's damaged. Again, I hate to no, but there's good news coming. There's good news coming. So yes, yes.
Well, yeah.
Now, going to hell, there's actually a story. I'm going to skip this text, the text 4, but it's actually pretty amazing how one of the rabbis said about one of the rabbis who became a secular Jew and became an atheist. He basically told him that he's going to advocate for him to go to hell. What? He's going to advocate for him to make sure he goes to hell? What's the Talmud saying? He's going to advocate for him to go to hell because hell is not a bad thing. It's not a punishment. In a way, it's a blessing. It's your transition from this world into the heavenly world. Most of us cannot make it into heaven without a stop in hell. It's just a fact. Sorry. Oh, okay. So we're going to talk about it in a second. Is there a limit to how bad hell can be? How bad is rehab? Right. I think also a good example analogy would be, take for example someone who never was able to bring himself because of his ego, because of many reasons, he never was able to bring himself to be in a real serious relationship with someone. Right? Now, that person, after a while, hopefully comes to their senses and realizes what was so wrong with them over their lifetime, why they were never able to get it together. And it's a pretty painful process to go through emotionally, to realize that all of this was really your fault. You were never able to let go of yourself, and you were self-centered and selfish and all of that. The truth hurts, but it's a very healing process, right? Because when you go through that, you come out knowing more about yourself and realizing, hey, 1 second, I can actually bring someone else into my life now, right? The same goes for the soul. The soul, the more we become self-centered, more self-centered and transgressions, which distance ourselves from God, the more the cleansing it needs when it goes to hell. It needs that rehab to realize, to see the truth, that it was always our ego that was standing in the way. It was many different reasons why we transgressed. It takes this process to understand why this happened. This healing process.
Is it the soul that causes the robber to be a thief? In other words, the soul does the soul make you a thief? He has a bad soul, or I don't know what put a judgment on it. Is it the soul that causes you to do good things or bad things?
Typically, no. Typically, the soul is your good voice,
right?
And your body is your evil inclination, is what conceals the goodness and tries to overpower and overcome your emotions, and to say, no, I'm the one in control. You do this, right? We all know that we have this hidden voice when we want, or I'll use something very material, not something bad, right? I see an apple turnover right there, right in front of me, right? It looks pretty juicy, looks pretty good. And my soul is telling me, Schneider, don't touch that. It may feel good right now, but it's not good for you, right? It's just not good for me. I'm young, stay healthy, right? And your body, your evil inclination, is the one telling you, one won't hurt. It's not such a big deal. Take a half, right? It's our bodies who typically are the ones who are pushing us to go over the edge when we shouldn't. So
therefore, if it's not the soul that causes you to be a thief, then why does the soul need rehabilitation? It's the body that needs.
Because the body affects the soul. The soul is trapped to a certain degree in the body for as many years as the person lives. And because of that, the soul is not just some foreign object. The soul, as we explained last week, becomes one, again, to a certain degree, with the body. When the body does something not good, it affects the soul. We all know what it means to be around someone who's not the greatest person, right? However much we don't want to be affected by them, and we know we're different, the more you hang out with that person, the more likely you are to be affected by them.
Yeah.
The soul, initially, pure. That's why kids are so innocent. Kids are beautiful, right? As the person gets older and more mature and are level of sophistication of desire get deeper and deeper, we have less and less control, and we're not so innocent, and it really takes a big toll on the soul. Now, how does hell work? Okay, how does hell work? What are the stages of hell? The stages of hell are as follows. There's a maximum. There's a maximum amount of time. What is that max?
Right here, 12 months.
Very good.
Yeah.
So what we know is, and before we get to the 12 months, text 6 on page 131. Sandy, you want to read out loud text 6? Because we know that Gehinnom is not a destination like other religions believe. It's a phase. It's a transition. And ultimately, every soul will reach the world to come, heaven. We didn't get to what heaven is. What is it? Yes, anyone. Anyone within the Jewish belief, we believe that everyone ultimately reaches heaven. Everyone. Now, let's read, as we see in text 6.
Sure. All of Israel has a portion in the world to come, as it is stated in Isaiah 60:21. Your people are all righteous. They shall inherit the land forever. They are a branch of my planting, the work of my hands, in which I take pride.
So we see that regardless of level of righteousness or religious observance, every Jew makes it to heaven. Fact. That's a Mishnah.
Aren't there like a whole bunch of things in, I think they're called in the chart,
That you can't. Okay. So I'm going to answer that next week because it's a longer answer. No, but it's a good question though. It's just a separate discussion. That's why I don't want to go there. Now,
I'm not sure if I understood what you said. I guess my question is, when you said all souls eventually enter heaven, some have to spend more time in rehab, right? Some less
Right.
time, but they all eventually reach heaven. Are you talking about only Jewish souls, or are you talking about all souls?
very good question. The Talmud view, and I don't want to, again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it's a good question nonetheless. The Talmud view is that every Jew, matter of fact, makes it to heaven. That's a fact. The Talmud view in regards to people who are not Jewish is that every non-Jew who's what we call Chazdei Umot HaOlam, righteous Gentiles, that's the word the Talmud uses, also has the same fate as all Jews. Someone as extreme as Hitler, may God erase his name and memory, is not in heaven, if that was your question. And yet, if there was a Jew who, God forbid, was anything close to that, would make it to heaven according to the Talmud. That probably leaves you with more questions than answers. I know. But I'm not here to answer all the questions yet. We're only halfway through the course. Pets?
My doggy.
Oh, yes, of course. I think you meant your doggy. I was like, who's your dog? But I don't remember a pet in your house.
I do
But
have that.
but that's another discussion I'm going to discuss in lesson 5 after reincarnation, after we understand reincarnation, because reincarnation about animals and stuff. So we're going to talk about that as well. Now, Ed, I know you mentioned that it's eternal punishment. So now we know that it's not eternal damnation or anything close to that. It is a phase, and therefore there's a max amount of time. What is that max? Like Fran mentioned, it is 12 months, which may help you understand why we recite Kaddish for that amount of time, for those 12 months, because that is the maximum amount of time that you could be saving your loved ones through the Kaddish and many other things. This is according to the Talmud, yeah, and Mishnah, yeah, which is the oral Torah.
Soul sectarian, and the Jews that have Jewish soul, and Christians get Christian soul.
So again, I'm sorry to answer the question like that, but it's also reincarnation related. So that's why I'm going to answer that question. No, I don't mean to undermine the question. God forbid. But you guys are gonna have to remind me of all the questions you have, because you have a lot of good questions.
But Rabbi,
Yeah.
it's Louise. I don't understand. How does a soul get rehabbed?
What happens in heaven?
Yeah, no, when they're in that,
In hell, I mean?
yeah, what's the process?
The process is that the soul, and thank you for bringing that up because I didn't really speak about it too much. The soul, the rehab process is that the soul is not within a body anymore. So all it sees is a true version of life, a good version of the world, of people, of souls, of godliness, of divinity, and spirituality. And therefore, what it lives by, for at least during that maximum amount of year, is it learns what truth is and what real godliness is, not with any filters of a body, not through a filter of a physical body, not through a filter of the physical world, which conceals a lot of these things. So the rehab process is actually more passive than active. Yeah, meaning it doesn't actually have to do anything. Just by being a soul, it's a painful process, because a soul, just being a soul without the physical aspects to it, is very painful, because for the last 80, 90 years, it wasn't used to that. Therefore, it's painful. It's being ripped away from a body, as we learned last week, the different stages, Shiva, the 3 days of Shloshim, the 30 days, etc., all those things, but it's more of a passive thing. There's no active thing that God switches on a rehab, button, and now the rehab begins. It's a 12-month process of a soul learning what a soul is once again.
And so what happens at graduation?
Oh, okay. So that's something that we're gonna have to talk about because we're already late. So I thought we're gonna cover it this week, but we got stuck with a lot of great questions. But I do want to conclude with, I know I'm jumping around here a little bit, with the Kaddish. You go to page 136. The most well-known Jewish morning custom is the recital of the Kaddish. The text of the Kaddish is a proclamation of God's greatness and holiness, and it is recited during, and surprise, surprise, during only 11 months of a person's after a person's passing. Now, I'll let you use your imagination. Why, if the max rehab is 12 months, do we only recite the Kaddish for 12 months, for 11 months? What is that?
Go ahead.
Correct. We don't want to at least even imply in the slightest bit that perhaps our loved ones needed the max rehab. So we stop. So we stop a month before, so that we say that's the max you needed, 11 months. You definitely don't need 12. You're not the worst. You're not the worst of the worst. Even if you were bad, you were close to as bad as many other people, right? So we stop after 11 months. Now this Kaddish, during those 11 months, we see in page 136, is also recited on every single yard site on the anniversary of the passing, and it's a merit that lifts the soul of the deceased out of Gehinnom and to higher levels of the world to come, which again we didn't talk about yet today. So the text of the Kaddish is there. Why is the Kaddish so important? Why is it recited specifically by a mourner? So the last text we'll read is text 12. Wouldn't have a chance. Want to read text 12 out loud?
Exalted and hallowed be.
No. Text 12.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Of the people of Israel is responsible for establishing and proclaiming God's sovereignty in this world. As the verse states, you, Israel, are my witness, God proclaims. Therefore, the absence of a Jewish person creates a void, as it were, in God's sovereignty in the world. In order to fill this void, others need to intensify their work accordingly and proclaim, on behalf of themselves as well as the deceased, may his name be exalted and hallowed. This is why reciting the Kaddish elevates the soul of the deceased. The aggregate of a person's actions and accomplishments in this world define his or her life. However, the tally of a person's achievements does not necessarily conclude at the moment of death. A complete evaluation of a person's accomplishments must also include all that is accomplished as a result of the person's inspiration and actions. Therefore, when those who remain alive, and especially the person's children and descendants, whose very existence is a credit to their forebears. To good deeds, they contribute to the deceased balance of accomplishments. For although the deceased is no longer active in this world, his or her actions continue to inspire positive deeds and actions. The recitation of Kaddish elevates the soul because God is being exalted in this world due to and in the name of the deceased.
So as we see over here, that even though it means something not as much as you think connected to a to mourning and to grief, but what we're doing is we're doing something special for them. We're doing a mitzvah for them, which is going to be expounded upon next week mostly, because next week we have to finish the conversation about what heaven is. Now that we know what hell is, what is heaven according to Judaism, and followed again, I promise, by the conversation of reincarnation. We're going to get there. Okay. That's a good question. Let's first understand what heaven is, and then we'll be able to answer the question. Monica, can I read it out loud? Where is she?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, Erica, Monica want to know, can we experience heaven and or hell while still in our body? That's a very good question, and a little bit connected to what Bill asked before, and I was hoping to answer that today, about how does knowing about heaven and hell affect our day-to-day lives in this world? So that's going to be a very important question. It's going to be well connected. I want to conclude with this 4-minute video from Rabbi Manis Friedman, probably one of my top 5 rabbis. I strongly suggest you search him up on YouTube. Unbelievable. He's dubbed the YouTube rabbi for a reason. He is going to really kind of recap in these 4 minutes the entire lesson. So here we go.
TorahCafe.com.
First, let's understand how you punish a soul. What do you do to hurt a soul? So that, that classical depiction of, the burning with the coals and with the guys with the forks poking you. We're talking about a soul. How do you burn a soul? So obviously that is too physical a description than that. The punishment of a soul is simply its own regret. So we're told that when the soul comes back to heaven, it basically is forced to sit and watch a movie of its own life. And how painful is that? Very painful. But what is the pain? The pain is the regret, the embarrassment. So what does it mean to burn in hell? You burn with shame. It's the embarrassment. And the shame is not I once did that. That's guilt. The shame is I still feel like that. Now that feeling or that memory, the effect of the world on the soul, wears off with time. So by the end of a year, the soul is clean. It doesn't have those feelings anymore. It's a clean, perfect soul, ready to be given a new mission, another life, and sent down in a reincarnation to give it another shot. So it's not God in the business of punishing. On the contrary, the suffering of a soul is its own rehabilitation. It burns off those unpleasant memories, and now it's an innocent soul ready to go on a divine mission again. So heaven and hell, we often say, well, you go up to heaven and you go down to hell. Heaven is not up and hell is not down. You have two souls sitting next to each other. One is in heaven, one is in hell. Because one of them is comfortable being a soul and the other one is still getting back to being a soul by burning off those memories of undesirable things. So God is not in the business of punishing. On the contrary. With punishment, any punishment in Torah means cleansing, purifying, restoring, undoing the damage. Like the kid who's running barefoot and the father says, you'll get a splinter. He says, I'm not afraid. He says, it might get infected. Oh, I'm not afraid. He said, it'll become gangrene. It doesn't scare me. Anyway, it happens. And so they rush him to the hospital, and the doctor comes with these sharp, cold tools, and it hurts. But he saves the leg. Now the kid is running around barefoot. And the father says, don't run around barefoot. You'll get a splinter. He says, I'm not afraid of splinters. He says, it'll get infected. I'm not afraid of infection. So I'll take you to the doctor. He says, oh. He goes and he puts on his shoes. See, that's childish. He's not afraid of the damage. He's afraid of the cure. So I say, you're going to get your foot all messed up and infected. That doesn't scare him. But the doctor will cure you. That scares him. When the Torah tells us that there's a cure, maybe a painful one, an embarrassing one, but it's a cure. So you're intimidated by the cure? You shouldn't be. You should be intimidated by the damage. So don't do the sin, not because you'll get punished. Punishment is the repair. Don't do the sin because you don't want to need to be repaired. So when God tells us that this is the punishment for this sin, this is punishment for that sin, that's not meant to be the motivation. He's not telling you to behave yourself to avoid punishment. The description of the punishment is really a description of the sin. This is the nature of this sin. How hard will it be to remove a stain from a cotton shirt? How hard will it be to remove a stain from a silk shirt? One needs cold water, one needs hot water. But that's not why you shouldn't do it. It's just telling you what it is you're doing.
Who is this?
This is Rabbi Manis Friedman. Manis is M-A-N-I-S. He's all over the place. Very, 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 very deep. He speaks also very soft and very clear to the point. He excels on two main topics, actually, on at the afterlife, as well as on relationships, dating, marriage, and things like that. He's unbelievable. I mean, unbelievable. So he's in Brooklyn. He used to run the yeah, if we can afford him. He's a very, very sought after speaker. He used to run the all girls / women's seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota, and then a few years ago he moved to Brooklyn. So he does. He's very big all over social media. So you can follow him there. But hopefully that gave you a good recap of today's lesson. And we're going to talk about heaven as well as reincarnation next week. Tomorrow is the Jewish Women's Circle event, the challah covers made with alcohol ink, as well as on Shabbat, this Shabbat day, the Shabbat services. So if you're around, we'd love to see you at 10:30.
Oh my God.
You have a good question. I don't know.
So that was 4 times a week.
And of course, those of you who will be around tomorrow will have weekly lunch and learn. But I also want to make a very special mention. Sorry I didn't mention it initially, but thank you, Eric and Monica, for dedicating today's class. Not, God forbid, as an afterthought, but thank you for bringing Torah and these important topics to the wider community. We will see you all, God willing, next Tuesday, same time, same place, and with even better refreshments.
Thank you.